computer. Great. So LitNet's Strategic Planning Committee meeting, again, welcoming Peter Toran with us today to just facilitate a conversation, really, to help us have a conversation about where we are in time and place and what strategic planning is and isn't, and how LitNet might move forward. So thank you to Peter for being here with us today.
Good morning. Thank you, Lee, and thank you all. Again, my name is Peter Toran. I work currently with a unique agency based out of Baltimore that does marketing, planning, web design, but totally for nonprofits. So nonprofits has been a focus of my career, whether that's been in the arts or higher education. And so I'm very happy to be invited to join with you this morning. I share a last name with one of your committee members. That's because Janice is my sister. So I don't know if full disclosure is quite the right word, but there you have it. So the purpose of the hour today, as Lee and I were talking about it, is really, as she said, to have a conversation. And I would love at the end of the hour for us to come away with a shared understanding of what we want to do. And part of that is going to be a shared understanding of what strategic planning is. And I would suggest more than that, what strategic planning should be for LitNet. Because in my experience, every organization, especially every nonprofit, is unique. And rather than have some doctrinaire, highly structured way to approach how you're visioning your next whatever time frame it is, which is really what planning is, rather than having that rigid structure, we should talk about what's right for you. And I think in 2022 and the way the world is changing and the way that things happen now that weren't on our minds 2 months ago, this idea of being much more flexible and adaptable makes more sense than ever. So with that in mind, first of all, any questions about what we want to accomplish today, which is really a shared understanding of where we are? And any questions about that? I will take silence as consent. So with that, and largely for my benefit, but also to get our discussion rolling, if you wouldn't mind going around, I would say the room, so I will say the grid, and just introducing yourself, how long you've been with the board, and then also really for my benefit and for the group's benefit, any thoughts you have about strategic planning. It can be stream of consciousness. It can be a horror story. It can be something positive. It can be just don't know much, but just where you are now with your thinking about what you are about to undergo. So with that in mind, I hate to be the teacher, but otherwise there's silence. I'm going to go around my grid, and Neil, you are first on the list, whether that's good or bad, but if you could just share and we'll get going.
Yes, I'm Neil Fox. I'm not on the board. I would describe myself as a provocateur of Merle and Lee. My background's in marketing and advertising. And I've been a tutor for about 3 or 4 years, I think. And LitNet is an extraordinarily great organization with a very simple approach to its work, and that relates to the fact that we have tutors that are volunteers and are, from what I can tell, quite motivated in what they're trying to accomplish with the learners that they have. And my experience has been, quite favorable.
Great, thanks. Merle?
Merle Kalis, president of the board. And the subject of strategic plans has always been a challenge for me because it's because I'm a planner by nature and everything I do is planned, it's hard for me to understand why we need to, why the planning process, but the process is really good because it uncovers a lot of stuff. And then I think what happens is you go through the process of the plan, and then because you've been through the process, nobody looks at the plan anymore, and because it's internalized. And I think when we reviewed our old plan, right, we did it with Pam the other day, and Lee and I did it with, for all the development issues, you find that it was so incorporated that you did all of it without even really being conscious of, okay, now we have to sit down and do this. So I think here, the process is far more important than the end product because it gets everybody thinking and then thinking of moving forward in the same direction.
Great. Some good points there. Wonderful. Leslie, you're right in the center.
Okay. So I'm Leslie Murray, and my granddaughter just picked her head up from being asleep. Hello. I started 9 years ago as a tutor, and then I came on the board about 6 or 7 years ago. I was involved with the first strategic planning, not the first, but the one that was done this past time. But it was my first time being involved with anything like that before. I don't come from a businessy background, and any of organizations that I've volunteered on before and in my previous work life from long, long ago, I never did anything like it. So I was, didn't know what was happening. I just sort of did what I was told and followed along. So I like, with the idea this time of making it a bit more succinct, maybe is the word, I don't know. I'm, whatever I can help, but I don't have a lot of this kind of background. So here I am.
Great. Glad you're here. Janice, you're next.
Hi, Peter knows who I am, but I think all of you do too. But anyway, Janice Toran, formerly in law and law teaching, and also in corporate management. And my experience directly with strategic planning was not so much making the plan, but managing to the plan. Oh, what a cute baby. So when I think of it, I do think of it a bit as a big binder and a set of objectives that my department would have to meet by certain timeframes, and that people that I was supervising would get their bonuses in connection with some of those goals and so forth. And so I found that always very cumbersome and very much top down. So what I'm excited about and liked a lot about parts of the reading were that it seemed to reflect a lot about what LitNet feels like to me. I've been a tutor for, 5 or 6 years and on the board for a couple of years. But this idea of, I don't know the language exactly, but managing to an experimental or, an evolving universe. So I'm looking forward to that.
Right. Eric, happy birthday.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, Eric Federer. I think I've been a tutor for about 10 years, and I am in my starting my eighth year on the board. Back in the late 70s, I was assistant director of a home care corporation in Massachusetts, and this was there may have been 27 or 30 of us around the state, and the state wanted a 5-year strategic plan from us. And it was my job to read it. So I went to classes in Boston, and they wanted a very granular plan that, down to the, each department and each goal and action steps. And it really was after a while, it seemed like a meaningless pursuit because, as soon as the ink dried, it was obsolete. And it wasn't a living, breathing, functioning document. And so I felt sort of that what I was doing was hamstringing people rather than giving them and having them create something that was really meaningful for their department and the organization. Now, granted, this was coming, the directive was coming from the state. And so it was very proscribed. So I think that's what I know what a strategic plan should not be. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Or I think I know.
That's great. That's great. It's like, the sculptor who makes the elephant by carving away everything that doesn't look like an elephant. It's good to know what doesn't work. John, welcome.
Hi, good morning, Peter. John Reynolds. I just recently joined the board in January. My background is an artist, designer, small businessman. I've been in both the for-profit and nonprofit in the arts organizations. I've done a fair amount of consulting with small businesses that did similar things. And I've always viewed a strategic plan as basically a roadmap, with the destinations being the goals. And you need to first know where you want to go, then you pull out the map. But that isn't necessarily linear. I mean, you always have to be flexible, especially in a small organization. And so I see it as driving along the map. Sometimes you see an opening and you step on the gas and go for it. And other times you go, wait a minute, there's a roadblock up ahead. It's either external or internal forces are changing things. I think in some ways, like today, and with the changes in the way that the business world's looking at strategic plans, it's kind of, now we have ways instead of that paper map in front of us. So, but it's the same thing. You have your goals, you head in that direction, and then you find alternate routes when you run into problems. So that's my take on it.
Great, thank you. Pamela.
Oh, sorry, me, Lynn. Did you?
Oh, Lynn, yeah, go for it. Sure.
I'm sorry. Did you say? I didn't hear what you said. I'm sorry.
Lynn, go for it. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, sorry. So I missed the beginning, but I'm assuming, and I apologize, I had another commitment, but you're asking everybody what their experience is with strategic.
Just how long you've been on the board, and then whatever strategic planning, whatever that means to you, your experience, whatever it is.
Okay.
No, nothing.
So yeah, so I just joined the board in January. I worked for about 17 years for GE, which was big into various plans. So I participated in that, not on that higher level, but as more of a minion, perhaps. After I left there, I had spent a lot of time on the Berkshire Country Day School Board, and I worked on the strategic planning committee when they were doing their plan, which there was a lot of re-looking at the mission at that time. And it was sort of like a back to basics thing. We had closed the high school. So that was a really long process, and it got down into the depths of, redefining the mission and what the school was going to be doing going forward. It was a big transitional period for them. So I think it was worthwhile, but it was more of what you described, or not you, but this reading that you gave us, what an old strategic plan would look like.
Right.
And I really can get my hands around this concept more, that it has to be something that's more flexible, more shorter term, like a living document, something that we're changing as we go along. And it also made me think about, when I was reading this, the thing that stuck with me was about being ruthless in what you won't do.
Mm-hmm.
That really struck me, especially after our retreat, and we talked about a lot of opportunities then, and being new to the board and not having a lot of history. I think, my perspective on that might be different. But anyway, those are sort of the few things that struck me as I've been thinking about this, as we're moving into the strategic planning process and being new to the organization. So I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I don't have a lot of history stepping into this. So I'm kind of open to, offering up what I can from my past experience with working in sort of corporate America, and then also in working in the nonprofit school area. So
Wonderful. Thanks.
that's really it.
Pamela, this would be you.
Yeah, there, my unmute was a little pokey. I'm sorry, I had to move downstairs because I was working upstairs and we're doing a little construction, and I watched our carpenter walk across the roof and start sawing about 3 feet outside the window. So I'm glad I'm on mute. I was on mute. Thank you very much for being with us today, Peter. It's really an honor. I started tutoring in 2005 and joined the board in 2017. My background is all in teaching. I was chair of the language program at Miss Hall School in Pittsfield and worked with international students almost exclusively. So my place on the board, I think, is almost exclusively about the program we offer, the education itself, not so much all of the many structures that hold that up. And I think that when I look at a strategic plan, which we did a lot of at Miss Hall's, was I'm hoping to scratch the surface of some deep questions, which go as deep as, why do we have the name of our organization that we have? And also, who do we really serve, despite the fact that our mission statement says adults? And should we continue to follow the one-on-one model? These are, the really big questions that I'd like to just walk through during the course of our strategic planning, which will of course be detail oriented. But my goal in all of that sort of digging is to be sure that we are more visionary than, punching bullets off lists. And that our vision is that our learners take the lead in how we can guide them toward their goals. So a strategic plan for me should be that the map is not so much our map as the map we want to hear about, and be sure that we can, in a realistic way and a professional way, serve the needs of those we really are trying to serve the needs of.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That baby is just too much, Leslie. Oh my gosh. I'll trade you a dog for a baby right now.
There you go.
This
That baby can't vote, by the way. The baby cannot vote. Sorry.
they say never act with dogs or children. So we've got them both here.
Yeah, we do.
I hope you all found that as valuable and interesting as I did. And I want to congratulate all of you and Lee and Merle for putting together this group. I mean, we have people who are new and will bring new perspectives and insights. We have people with rich careers in corporate to nonprofits to teaching. And so that is great, having that multitude of perspectives. It may make our work a little bit messy and slower, but I think that's great because it's going to make it richer and deeper. One thing that Lee and I talked about and may be helpful to remind us is that we're in no rush, right? There, you have a plan that goes through the end of the year. And so this is a wonderful time, as Pamela said, to look at, we can look at big questions, we can look at small questions. The other thing, and I don't mean to be snarky about it, but if the sun rises on January 1st, 2023, and the ink isn't dried on our plan, you all will be okay. As a matter of fact, there is a legendary quote by the founder of Southwest Airlines. I forget his name, but the quote is that I used to have in my old office. Yes, we have a strategic plan. It's called doing things. And what I like about that, and some of you have hinted at this, which is a plan is one thing. And as I think it was Merle who said, I plan all the time and in our head, but what really matters is strategic action. And so when things become paralyzed, we're not going to get there. Just a few notes that I took just for my own self is, and this is really stream of consciousness. I heard top down in a couple of ways, usually not positive. I heard a long process. I heard a roadmap mentioned in a couple of interesting ways. We heard deep questions, big questions, vision, all interesting in this very, very early stage, just from what you all said. Any responses from all of you from what you have just shared with each other? Anything pop out or not? Doesn't have to, but.
I love
my-
diversity of
go ahead.
skills and experience, and I think that's going to make this a really great committee.
Any other thoughts? Did I step on
I-
something?
I think,
I get the feeling that we're kind of all on the same page. I mean, we heard different things from different people, but sounds to me like it kind of dovetails in that we want a living, breathing, functioning document that accurately represents the needs of our students or learners.
Great.
I'd like to just put up a point which didn't get mentioned, and that's internal capacity. And through the planning process, and I've been through this a couple of times, I think it's very key to think of goals and setting strategies and tactics, et cetera, around the idea of what actually is available from the standpoint of staff. Who's responsible? Do we have depth of workers to accomplish some of these things? And I think that, keeping an eye on internal capacity and making that part of the strategic plan is very relevant.
Great
Yes.
point.
I wanted to say too, that I stepped into the director role in September of 2020. I basically didn't use the strategic plan to guide my thinking at all. So it wasn't something I look back on. It wasn't something that I said, how's it going? As Peter said, by default, some things naturally were in motion. But what I did look at, Peter and I discussed this yesterday too, I create each year a budget narrative. So the budget narrative says, here are my funds. What are my plans? What are the goals and objectives for those funds, right? And I just printed it out. And it's amazing how much we've already accomplished in this budget narrative, how much is in motion. So this, for me, feels like a 1-year plan of, I know it's different than a strategic plan, but how many layers, then I have my job description and my performance eval, there's how many layers of this do we need and are possible to be actively working with. And I'm so excited by this is what I've learned from Peter, the idea of the simpler, the better, it's so true. And simultaneously, as a leader, I've been in a leadership position for over 20 years. I like and feel it's my responsibility to have what's happening now goals in my mind. And also it's my job to be moving things forward. So what are the things that need to be set in motion for later? So again, how does that get articulated and worked?
Great thoughts all. And this isn't like my dog ate my homework, but some of you have had a chance to read what we shared, the 2 articles. If not, if you have a chance later on, please do. But some of you referenced it. Any thoughts about that? Any questions? Any revolts? Any yeah, that's interesting. Anything from those readings that popped out for you?
I think the issue of goal setting as a starting point is quite relevant. And I think that's the starting point. What is the vision and what are the goals of the organization? And I think it's important to start off and trying to understand that from the standpoint of the board as well as the staff.
Okay, good. Any other thoughts? We don't, doesn't have to be, and hopefully it was at least provocative.
I would just say that one thing that I'm not sure if I can identify exactly where was, whose plan is this? And I think Lee's comments are very well taken, that I thought more when I read some of this, that this, if you don't want it to be top down, then maybe it's partly a board plan, but mostly a plan for staff to be guided by.
I want to have anyone, any other thoughts about the articles, please jump in. But it's like Janice has been reading our agenda. We talked about this yesterday, but since she brought it up, the next thing I wanted to talk about was exactly that question. And it's an interesting thing. And Neil mentioned, the board and the staff, but whose plan is this? And when I work with nonprofits, I will sometimes, it will be the board that does this plan, and then they hand it off to the director and the staff, and they see it for the first time. Other organizations have a board member on a staff planning committee just as a liaison. But to Neil's point and to Lee's point, we're a small organization. We have capacity limits, but the existential question for us is, whose plan do we want this to be?
I think if it's the board's plan, the danger is, and I just, you come up with a plan and expect the staff to execute it. While they're doing everything to keep the engine running, just day to day. So I think, it's an important question, is whose plan is this, and how does it interrelate with staff capacity and staff thinking? And the staff are the people, I think there are 2 components. One is the staff who is on the front line every day. And the other thing that we haven't mentioned in all this is the other people that are on the line every day are the tutors. And and the stuff that we've been talking about, I think it's important to also figure in, what are we learning from the tutors that are on the line every day?
Mhm.
And how does that drive the planning process?
And I've brought this point up before too, the idea of, so if it belongs to the staff can be a changing element. So what does that mean, particularly the leadership role? So how does such a plan belong to LitNet and not be, oh, this was Jennifer Vrabel had these ideas for LitNet, and then Lee Doherty came and she has these ideas, that how, and obviously a good director is not going to just be thinking of themselves. I know in some ways it's being, I don't know what the word is, but how does it belong to LitNet in a way that it can also survive any transition of staff and leadership?
I don't think it's an either or proposition. I think if the staff comes up with a plan and the board isn't involved, and they think of all these things, and then the board is left holding the bag for raising the money to do whatever they plan. And if the board is only involved, you have a lot of other issues that come up. So I think we're very wise to have Lee on this committee as a representation of the staff. But I think it's definitely a joint effort and a joint plan. I don't think we can, it's for everybody.
And I think Peter's,
the-
sorry, John, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's the short answer is simply that all the stakeholders have to be represented in the plan, or it isn't going to work. And
Right.
by everybody, I mean from the staff to the board, to the learners, the tutors, and the donors. You got to take it all into account, or everybody will be using a different map, and that's not going to work. So.
And again, the big takeaway for me is it doesn't have to be 5 years. So that gives us a lot more time for it to be current and relative and survive change and be readjusted through any change that may or may not happen, right? 5 years, look what happened in 5 years with this plan, a lot. 3 executive directors, 1 period without an executive director, board president changes, board changes, whole staff, location, everything possible happened during these 5 random years. So the 2-year, taking it back to a smaller dose, I think remedies a lot of this as well.
So I think in my naivete, and having been only involved with this plan the last time ever, I felt like we did a good job of picking, deciding sort of who was going to be responsible. And it was pretty across the board. We had the, things that the executive director was going to be responsible for, things that the education committee took on, things that development took on. And we spread it out, I thought. And I guess my question now is that not how we're thinking of it this time, or is there a different approach? That's a question.
So I don't know the answer, but I think that the answer is a different approach feels necessary. When Pam and Merle and I looked back at the education points, some of it we didn't even know what it meant. We're like, what does that mean? And if I'm the executive director and Pam's education chair, and we can't understand, what the intention was, that feels complicated. So I feel like we're definitely in need of a more simple approach. That for me feels, I would like to ask that we consider a simpler approach. What that looks like, I don't know, but that one, beautiful as it was, organized as it was, collaborative as it was in making it, I think the living it was not as envisioned at the start. But what a great document.
I'm just going to throw some spaghetti at the refrigerator. I am thinking that it would be great to write a 3-year plan in terms of goals. So mission statement, goals, fine tuning all that, and writing just a 1-year detailed plan. And then, of course, there might be things that overlap into the 2nd year that you could deal with in a more detailed fashion. And then annually writing the next 1-year plan.
Interesting.
And of course, in that process, going back and looking at the overarching structure of it, the goals, the mission statement. But I'm thinking that in terms of getting really granular, that maybe 1 year makes a sense under a broader umbrella. So talk me down.
I think that sounds genius. To me, it's like you're saying, where are we going? But you're not articulating how are we going. You're saying we'd like in 3 years, we might like to have a financial literacy center. I'm just being hypothetical. But next year, we want to deal with nailing down the citizenship program. But this year, we're really going to write workshops and whatever, raise money, blah, blah. I like that idea because as we look at the 1-year plan and kind of say how it's going to be, we can continue to think about those bigger goals. But I think it makes sense how things change to then flesh that next year out as we get to it and then add another, like, okay, these are, I think it sounds like a great idea. I don't know what other people think.
And just to put some definition around Eric's suggestion, is that in a sort of a classical or in strategic planning think, that 3-year plan would be a strategic plan, and then the annual ones are often called operational plans. So you know, you've got, and so there is there is a methodology for that. There's also a recent client did something interesting and similar, which was to articulate those five major goal areas. And then what they did is break it down into short-term, medium-term, and long-term. What are we going to do right now? What are we going to do? And I think they put some parameters, but overlapping parameters. So, you know, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3 years, 3 to 5. So another way, but those goals remain the same. So it was an interesting way to track progress. I just hope that they're wise enough to adjust every, you know, time they have an ability to talk about this. I joke with Lynn, I always tell people to write their plan in pencil, you know, think of it in pencil, because that's going to make you understand this kind of continued need to reassess. But interesting idea. Any other thoughts about?
Peter, could you talk a little bit about input to planning? In other words, we have an audience that we serve, which are our learners. We have the operational approach to serving those people, which are the tutors. What do we actually know from a qualitative and quantitative point of view with regard to the 150 learners and tutors that we currently have? You know, do we need to do financial literacy? I'm just picking that up because it came up on recently. What's the segmentation of our learner base? Are they in it for just, you know, working knowledge and language ability? Are they looking to us, or are they looking facilities that interrelate to their literacy learning, and then, you know, bridging that into advanced job searches or whatever? And where does the input come from the tutors that are working with these folks every day? So I haven't seen any research that we've done that would suggest we know about what we're planning to do. It's a bottoms-up thing as opposed to a top-down thing. It isn't the board or the staff who's deciding what to do. It should be coming from the people we're serving, which are the tutors and the learners. And I haven't seen any research in terms of how do they break down, what do they need, what's their persistency with the organization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
These are great points. I would deflect to Merle and Lee, but would suggest that perhaps we don't get into too much depth there. And I don't have that historical organizational knowledge any more than you do, but I fully agree. And it may be a construct of this planning going forward that we want to develop a rich understanding of the people that we serve, and the people who work with and for us. And so there are lots of ways to do that. And we can even do that as part of this planning process. We can survey our volunteers, and now we're beginning to connect the dots. Whose plan is it? We can survey our donors to say who, you know, what is it that one of the great benefits of a planning process is it's an engagement tactic, right? One of the things I often recommend is before you finalize your plan, socialize it with the audiences who are important to you. Socialize it with your volunteers. I would love to get your learners input in this. But to your point, having data is key. Is absolute key. I don't know, Lee, if you want to talk about that at all.
Sure. So absolutely right, Neil. I think it's a really good time and where we are in time and place to envision a tutor survey. I feel like in some ways we've been building out of the ashes, so to speak. That's COVID related. On the learner front, sorry, my dog is demanding to go outside. So on the learner front, having Miguel has changed our relationships with learners. We now have much more contact with them. He has a way to contact them as a group, to send surveys. There's a Facebook page that they interact with, and he just started a learner advisory council. It's at the very beginning. He invited 9 people from different parts of our program to attend. Only 3 showed up. I reminded him that's how it is in the beginning, right? Hopefully next week 4 will come, or 5. And the intention is to get feedback from them. So we're beginning to do those things. And I agree they're important. I do feel like, as I mentioned, we are in touch with the tutors. They fill out their monthly reports. We have data, but the kind of data you're talking about is more opinion or getting, finding out what do we want to know from them. And I think that would be a good idea to do soon when we find out what would be helpful to know from our tutors. So I think we're ripe for it.
I want to be mindful of our time. Whoa, 10:43. Okay. One thing, another question, a sort of existential question we have is, and you've touched on this a little bit, but how are you going to use this plan? What are you going to do with it? We've heard in your intro, sometimes it's used for performance reviews. Sometimes it's going to show where the money flows. But is it premature, or what do you think, what are you going to do with this? If we're going to do this, if we're going to put this effort into it, we should know what we're going to do with it, right?
I think where it's most useful is acting as the guide, moving the organization forward, in that whatever is in the business plan, those goals get directed to the executive director and the committees, right? And then Lee takes the part that's the staff part and develops the goals for each staff member, so they're all in concert with the goals she has to achieve. And then the board president will work with the committee to make sure that the committees are in concert with what they have to achieve to reach whatever the big goal is for the year and whatever the areas.
I guess, yeah, I agree with that from an operational perspective. I'm listening to everybody. I'm a little torn between like what Pam said initially really struck me as looking at the big questions. And then we've been having a lot of conversations about, seems like, more operational activities. And I'm just a little confused about that, because I was struck by what Pam said, and I kind of agreed with her about, looking at this big picture, this big strategy of just confirming who we are, and even some things like our name and who do we serve, and is the one, like something so big as to say, is the one-on-one model really the best for everybody? And, so anyway, I just was struck by some of the questions she brought up, and it made me think, yeah, that's like a big strategic risk, looking at something bigger versus the operational piece, which of course is also very important, of, things we've already talked about, like how are we measuring our progress? Now, those are things we've already, sounds like people are working on already. I don't know. I'm just a little, I don't know, maybe Peter can straighten this out in my brain for me.
I wanted to just say that we recently surveyed the board about our mission, and granted it was the board before the new board, and it was 100% that we feel strong in our mission.
Yep.
So that answer came through. And do we want to expand our services? That also came up in our Scott. So I feel like we just asked that question, and the answers came on that chart. Of what
I was just using that as examples of what you said.
Sure, but I just wanted to recalculate that, just to remind us all that we've asked and we agree we're solid on our mission. the idea of changing the name didn't come up at the board retreat. What did come up is, which I think this kind of work, whatever it becomes, is looking at what are our challenges and opportunities and agreeing on the opportunities, because there's some differences of opinion. They're all collected there, but we have not had the time to go through and say, what does LitNet think? Where does LitNet want to go? Because there are some different ideas on here. Nobody's ideas were cut off. Anybody was allowed to put an idea up there. We haven't waded through the challenges, and even some of the challenges, we might have a discussion and not agree that they are a challenge. It was somebody's opinion that that's a challenge. Same with the opportunities. We may go through them and not agree that that's an opportunity. It was somebody's opinion. So that's certainly work that will help us get closer, get more fine-tuned in however we decide to articulate it, whatever kind of plan.
So as we were discussing all of this, it occurred to me that there's huge changes. In other words, thinking through the mission, thinking through who we serve, and do we want to continue serving them? Do we want to expand? Do we want to change from one-on-one? Those are huge. And I think, so there's a big question. Do you want to do an overhaul right away? Or do you want to kind of expand in the program area and then go back and look at your foundation and decide if you want to, build an extension to the house, or, so we have a choice. We can either, I definitely think going deep is a worthwhile experience, but if we go deep and offer new programs, I'm scared it's just gonna like jumble up. So do we plan, so I mean, that's where my thoughts are in my head. I just don't know if doing both at the same time. I think maybe we could survey everybody, get the data we need, right? And then figure out whether it's time to do the big changes, or maybe just put a part of the plan that we're going to look at the big changes.
Yeah.
I was really excited with Eric's idea, and then you're giving names to his ideas, which is to look hard at a one-year operational plan and really develop that. Because I remember, now that we're talking about it, that the last strategic plan was sort of handed to me, and I looked at it. I never looked at it again. It had no value at all. I don't know what the flaws were, but having a real operational plan makes so much sense to me. And if we, I think, examine a year in asking the big questions kind of in the background, we're going to maybe find a strategic plan sort of unrolling in front of us that will not have a sudden stomp out effect like COVID did to all of our programming. Right. I think that if we watch one year really carefully and in a way that is always aware of, well, I wonder if this class would be better if we had 3 people, just sort of the little details. And if we start really counting how many of our learners live in Pittsfield, and, I think that a very careful one-year plan sounds just terrific to me.
I was thinking that a good next step may be to take the challenges and opportunities, send it back to the board at some point and have them vote. You get 3 votes. Which challenges do you think are the top 3? Which opportunities do you think are the top 3, to kind of, as we head into that next phase, so that we can come to, narrow it down a bit and see, do we agree, or, let's talk about what comes out of that data in terms of challenges and opportunities.
I think, for many, many years, it's interesting, because when we were founded to help essentially the people who got through the school system without ever learning how to read, right? For whatever reason. And then there was a big switch over when we started developing the immigrant community started coming to us. And I understand at the time, talking to former board members, it was huge deciding whether we wanted to branch out to ESL, right? And I think we've been And ever since then, moving forward in ESL, we added the citizenship and that was good, but we've been kind of in a groove, right? And we're all very comfortable in the groove. And so it's a big thing expanding the groove. I mean, there's all kinds of questions like, will we have enough money? And, are we offering something? So it's kind of, we're like waking up now and saying, okay, because I think what the move to the digital platform taught us was that we are capable of moving into other directions without hurting our mission or having it affect in any way. So, and I think that was a great learning experience for us all because we jumped into this whole new thing. So I think now that we realize we can jump, we have to figure out, okay, we're going to jump again, but how far and how high and, which way. So, and I think what's understated in all of this, Peter, is that we all feel the need to go deeper and offer more things to our learners. And we all share that need, I think, right?
You could say your need is providing more services. You could also say if we're measured by what we do as far as influencing the target that we're serving, then expanding
Right.
is another way of looking at influence.
Right.
We've got 150 learners now. For argument's sake, you want to have 500 learners by 2030. I mean, some just throwing something down that suggests that you can either grow in terms of depth of services, you could grow through expansion of what's working right now.
Solidifying what's working.
Combination of both. But I think it all starts with research.
Right.
And research will feed the board, the planning committee, in terms of what do we do with this organization right now? Without that, it's like, to me, just saying, oh, well, somebody thinks we ought to change the model, or somebody thinks we ought to change this or that. Well, what's all that based on? So I'm a big proponent of establishing what our influence targets will be based on an assessment of what we're doing currently, and getting that feedback from tutors who are in a great position to tell us, well, this, and also to understand the segmentation of the learner base. You've got people that have just come to this country and want to learn English. You've got other people that have been here 10 years and want to become CEOs of a new company they're starting.
Right.
So it's a potpourri of a lot of stuff, and without input, I think it's really important to not make quick decisions about goals and planning and strategy. Let's learn first and base the plan on what we're learning.
I agree, Neil, and I was going to ask Peter, is then our first step is, I have the name of the person who did the survey of the school system in Berkshire County. They're thinking about merging school systems together, and they conducted this massive survey that they handed out to the population. And I have the name of the woman who did that. I think she did a great job. Is our first step just figuring out what we need to know before we go to step 2?
I think it would be hard to argue against that. I think having a very strong, first of all, I think we need, and you're beginning to right now, articulate the kinds of questions you want answers to, or to begin to articulate the data that we want. And, it's also fine to understand that this is going to be baseline data, right? It's a snapshot of where you are right now. And I fully agree that before you start to set goals, you can set goals, but let me tell you, before you start to set actual metrics and measurables, you need to know what's possible. You need to know where you are. So I don't want to be prescriptive right now, and we don't need to decide at this meeting, but certainly having a data-based, having being able to make decisions based on data to the extent that you can gather that data is a very smart first step. I do want to just share two things. Lynn had talked about being confused, and I don't want anyone to be confused, but similarly to the operational plan, and I don't want to also nerd out about strategic planning here, but there is goals, and then this is another way to think of it, and it can be helpful. Underneath a goal in a traditional strategic plan are going to be objectives. Yeah. And then underneath objectives are going to be tactics. So if you think of this as a pyramid where the goals are the big things, you go, but a really quick history lesson is one of the articles referenced is strategic planning, for better or for worse, comes from the military, right? And so an analogy I always use is a goal may be to win the war. Hate to be using this analogy in these times. An objective, which is a part of that goal, would be to take the hill, okay? And a tactic would be, fat guys hide behind rocks and skinny guys hide behind trees, so that's how you're gonna get this done. And it all scaffolds up to this goal. But what you'll see in that metaphor is levels of detail. And so that sort of tactical level is really what we talk about in an operational plan. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I didn't want you to be confused. One thing I would throw out here, in addition to that data gathering, and is actually going to perhaps stimulate you to think about the kinds of questions that you need answered, is something that I find helpful, and it could be a full board discussion, which is sometimes planning comes down to asking and answering three questions. What is it that you're currently doing that you want to keep doing? What is it that you're not doing right now that you want to start doing? And then the third one is the one that I find organizations have the biggest challenge with, which is, what are you currently doing that you should stop doing? And the reason that's so important is that we've mentioned it before, is a capacity issue. And also, quite frankly, it's always easiest to keep doing what you're doing, right? And in that, because you're just doing it. But if you take the time to see what is effective, are we doing things that are giving us a return on the investment in our mission? You want to ask that tough question, right? So having those three questions is not a bad way to start, perhaps with your board colleagues, getting their hands around the questions you want to ask, but also, it's a good sort of, it all boils down to that in the end.
What was the third one again, Peter?
What are you currently doing that you should stop doing?
And what was the second one?
The second one is, what are you not doing now that you should be doing? And that first one is, what are you currently doing that you want to continue? And I would add, want to continue or even increase. So, boiling it down to those three can sometimes help us have substantive and interesting conversations without, that also, I would suggest, marries that or joins that, big vision, big picture things with actual things that we want to do. Lee, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind us that we are not broken.
Right.
We are not the Berkshire Hill School District. We are not where BCD was when the high school. We are not at, those are great examples. I'm just wanted to remind us, things are good at LitNet. We want them to be better, of course, and we want this plan to hold it together and be better and grow, but we are not in any urgent place where things are terrible and we have to find out what we're doing wrong. And so I just think that we need that mindset as we go into our next strategic plan, that we're not trying to fix something broken, that we're trying to just stay strong and grow in a way that makes sense. It doesn't counter these questions. It doesn't counter getting data, but we are in a really good, positive place. We're not trying to, hold things together. So just thought that was a good thing to remember.
That's a great point. And I love the idea of data, but the flip side of that is paralysis by analysis, right? And if you ever want to know that, work for a college or university. But we want data, but at the end of the day, you're never going to have all that you need. So don't let that stop you. Leslie, you're.
Yeah, I also think that that since we're in this sort of post, hopefully COVID situation, that some of the things that we're going to be bringing back could answer some questions too. But I feel like if you were to poll the students or the tutors right now, they're itching to have these tutor gatherings again and things like that, which we had to put on hold, but of course they're coming back. So I'm not sure it's the right time to ask some of those questions, because some things are just going to be resolved as a matter of our situation being resolving. I don't know.
But maybe in the fall. I mean, I think we don't have to ask those questions, but what questions do we want to ask? What do we want to know from tutors? And I would love to find out what those questions are and ask. I think it shows them that they are constituents, that they are stakeholders, that they matter so much, that we're not sitting here on a Zoom meeting making decisions without thinking about their experience, because we couldn't without them. So I would love to figure out what the right data is to get from tutors.
I would add to what Lee said too, that we're not broken and we're not facing a crisis like COVID for the first time. So that just
And
good place to be.
and we have a shit ton of money.
Is that an accounting term?
Totally. I learned it.
It's a term of art. It's a term of art. Yeah.
That's a good point.
All right, we have the Zoom allowance to continue for another 10 minutes. Is that right, Lee? If people are able to.
Timing wise, Peter was being conscious about an hour, and I appreciate that too, but I didn't want to run out the door and not close it up well. So I think let's say we're going to take 10 minutes to kind of close up and I don't know, just earmark. We're in no rush. We have time. Let's think about this. We can share this with other board members. We can digest it. What other questions or thoughts do people have on this topic as we wrap up today's meeting?
Yes.
You're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I just remember from boarding school that there were sort of ratios about how many kids you can have in a facility with how many teachers and what works in terms of stability. And there's a ratio between like how big an institution can get and how big a support staff has to be. And I'm kind of curious about that because I feel so positive about where LitNet is right now. We have made so many advances during COVID that it's almost amazing to me that the staff is so good. We've reached out to more students than I think ever. But I do remember having learned that and never having thought about it before. A building can only hold so many kids and the tuition can only bring in so many dollars and that can only pay so many teachers. And I'm just sort of wondering if there are parameters for organizations like this. Like if we were to say one of our goals is to add a new program that will bring another 100 learners into LitNet, do we need a new building? Do we need more staff? Are there ratios like that for us to just always keep as, the big wall outside our thinking?
I think we're unique in that we're not bound by we don't operate in a cube. And so I would think it might be hard to find metrics for an organization like ours in certain respects.
Certainly an important question.
Yeah.
Very important issue, Pam. And I would say the short answer to that is probably we make our goals, right? We do this process and then we have like goals, right? Like,
Mhm.
and then you say, what do we need to do that? And is that achievable? I mean, is it
Yeah.
conceivable that we could add 3 new staff people? Is it conceivable that we could build our own schoolhouse? Is it, so I think the answers, I think you're right. And at some point along the lines, we have to figure out, can we do it, and what would it take to do it? And if the answer is too much, it takes too much to do it, then maybe we put that goal on the back burner until we can get there, right?
Yeah, no, and Neil was saying that too. Like in other words, we should look at our resources um, as part of the planning process.
Yeah, and I think too, like we have 150 learners. So that's like 145, let's say 140 tutors, because some people have more than one. Miguel and I know those tutors, and we check in with those tutors, and so what's going to break it so that Miguel and I are like, wait, who's that? Oh yeah, that person. Like right now, I feel like everybody's known to us. The learners less so, but they are. I want to be able to know every match that's out there. I want to run into a tutor at Big Y and be like, oh, how's, Maria? I want to know their learner. I think that that's important. So I think it is, to continue to think of what does capacity look like? And especially if we add a program, yes, what does that look like? So I think it's, if we're doing kind of what's our problem now, what's our later problem, that would go in our later column, but one to have a flag on to continue to watch and say, let's keep an eye on that problem.
And maybe another way to think about parameters, or this is what I hear Lee saying, is culture. What do we want the culture to look like in terms of, running into a fellow tutor at the Heritage, or, what I mean? And that's different from bricks and mortar, but I think has some of the same qualities to it.
Yes.
Interesting, Janice, because that whole question of culture came up as we were facing all these fabulous new board members. And in the nominating committee, we had long discussions on, okay, we're adding all these people. How do we bring them in a way that they feel as much a part of the culture as we want them to? Because that's always been a really significant thing for LitNet, that the board is really engaged and dedicated and contributing whatever they can, but always engaged and dedicated.
And it may be that is a big piece of what we're talking about, is we can come to some agreement about the culture that we want to maintain more easily than we can talk about some of the maybe more granular things, but if we have that as the background, maybe things flow from that.
Mm-hmm.
It occurs to me that, coming in recently, whatever, as you said before, Lee, it's not broken. And this is not a startup. You've got 30 years of history and successes and probably some failures on the way, but you've got an institutional memory. And so I don't see anything that's thrown out there at the moment as major problems. You measure it against, how did we get here before? How did we get $750,000 in the bank? How was that achieved? So you've got all these things where if we're a brand new organization facing all this, the problem would be where to start. So I would say, look at how you got to where you are now and say, okay, let's use that as a model.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, this committee needs a chair. So I'd love people to just be thinking about that. And as the executive director, I promise to partner very closely with the chair of this committee. I can only say that Merle does that on all accounts as well. I mean, the committee would require some leadership and presence, obviously, but I think it could be a fun committee to chair, and we have some good momentum and time around it. So nobody has to step up now, but that will be an important decision to make. And I think that we can sit with today for a bit, and we have our board meeting on April 28th. I will prepare a summary for that meeting and share with the board where we are on this front. And then I think it would make sense to meet after the board meeting at some, sometime in May, just to connect and ask ourselves, what did we decide we'd like to do? What are some things that we've decided we'd like to do? Again, we have time, but while it's kind of fresh in our brains, at least touch base about it and think together. And again, Peter, we're so fortunate just to have your guidance.
Yeah.
It's a big topic. It's again, just helping us keep it small feels just so much more exciting and manageable rather than this big looming strategic plan. So it feels much more exciting. And
I think that we have made some really great, actually, we've made a lot of great decisions communally here on this call. We've all come to an understanding that anything we do has to involve all our stakeholders, right? And anything we do has to involve much more information that we really don't have the answers to right now. And that we all share the same desire that moving forward is a great thing. So, I mean, does anybody else have any that?
Good. Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Well, if you all are excited, that's an amazing accomplishment right there, and you should be excited. I'm excited to have been a part of this, and feel free to ask any other questions. Keep me posted along the way if there's anything else I can do. And through all of this, don't forget. I mean, just looking at your website, but just don't forget about the wonderful stuff that happens every day that's probably happening right now, that you all make possible. So sometimes in that, that's what is important. That's what you do. And that's just so wonderful. And thank you for that.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Peter. Yeah.
All right. Enjoy the sunshine and have a nice weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
Neil.
Everybody.
Special thanks to Neil too. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.